Welcome, everyone. I am Emily Ropars from Early Choices. This is episode 3 of Inclusion from the Start. Early Choices is the inclusion initiative for the Illinois State Board of Education, and we promote high-quality early childhood inclusion from birth to 5 and beyond. I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Shameka, to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Shameka Brown, and my pronouns are she and her. And I am also an inclusion specialist for Early Choices and looking forward to this conversation today.
All right, Tim.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tim Villegas. My pronouns are he, him. I am the Director of Communications for the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education, and I'm very happy to be here.
I'm Parker Wrobbel. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a man with Asperger's and a brother to someone with Down syndrome.
Awesome. So we're all coming with different lived experiences and backgrounds to come talk about inclusion. So we're going to start with just defining what inclusion means to us.
I would say inclusion to me means that everyone is welcomed, respected, and valued no matter who you are or what background or what, just basically just accepting who you are. I think that's a big piece to inclusion.
I often think, this is Tim. I often think about inclusion as a philosophy and a practice. So when we talk about inclusion, whether it's if we're talking with one of our partners in a school district, or if I'm just talking with someone in general about what inclusion is, sometimes it can get a little fuzzy on what we actually mean. So it's really, to me, both. It's a philosophy, it's a mindset, belief system that all means all. Shameka, I love what you're talking about, what you said about everyone being welcomed and respected and valued. And it's also a practice in what you actually do in the classroom and how you set up and deliver instruction. So that's kind of, what we talk about in inclusion. And there's also even more detail. I can get into it if you want. There's even like a more detailed explanation. Where when we're talking about inclusive education specifically, we talk about inclusive placement. We talk about membership and belonging. We talk about participation, and we talk about learning. So all of those things are kind of woven into this, term inclusion.
I appreciate the use of philosophy there, Tim. I think, to me, the most important thing about inclusion is that, with many things, keeping in context everyone's humanity and the fundamental uniting force that should be, and I think so often isn't. And I think that it is a fundamental piece of your moral character to keep in mind that everyone should be treated with respect. Everybody should be treated as just as much a person as you are. Everybody has just as full lives as you do. And I think that to discredit anybody, to try to take that away from anybody because of any individual difference, especially anything that is outside of their control, I can't imagine that that's something that anybody should have with them. Nobody should have that kind of hate.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like there's this common thread through what everyone's saying of it's beyond just a philosophy. We all agree that it is a philosophy, but it can't stop there. It's an actionable thing. But it's also a core right of every individual. What can schools do to make those environments really respect belonging and support belonging?
I agree, Emily, and it kind of goes back to what Tim stated. I feel like first off, you have to first foster acceptance of the inclusion, embrace diversity, and implement inclusive policies, not just by word, but it should be written somewhere to where it is documented and shown. But also promoting empathy, because there's a lot of emotions and a lot of things that's going to go on. And Brene Brown always talks about sympathy versus empathy. And I think that's where we need to be when we think about the placements, and we think about that it's not we're sympathizing because someone has this diverse need or this kind of concern, but also providing support for those needs, as well as encouraging collaboration and addressing any discrimination you may have as a person yourself, or the lack of not knowing. Because a lot of times I feel that if we don't know, we go to the comfort of just going with the norm, right? Like, well, this is what we normally do, and this will work. But if we educate, collaborate, and learn, then we can make all families, all children feel welcome and supported. And I think that's a big piece of it too. So in a nutshell, all those things come apart when you're thinking about creating an inclusive environment in the school system.
Love that, Shameka. One thing that comes to mind with creating inclusive environments, I think a lot of it starts with the leadership of whatever entity you're talking about, whether it's a school or a district, even the teacher, right, in the classroom, and the leadership setting a vision for inclusive practices, and then also like the philosophy of inclusion. I think what we found is that the work is sustainable when the leadership commits to inclusive practices. And that looks different wherever you are. So if, we're talking about early childhood education, it's the directors of the programs, or the directors of the early childhood program in a district, or whether it's a Head Start program, whatever it is, that they are committed to all means all. And so that's kind of like the beginning of it. And then there's all of the things that, like what we talked about before, how being a practice, all those things being present so that learners can experience belonging and then learning.
I'll build on what both of you said. I know, Shameka, you mentioned the way that people tend to default in their behavior. And I've said this story before, it'll be the first for the vlogcast here, but one of the most striking things that I saw in my time in my high school was that, of course, that I mentioned at the beginning here, that I have Asperger's. So there were certain policies and procedures and things that I was put into that were made for me, none of which really impacted my perception from peers. I wasn't physically divided from them. There was no time of the day where Parker got up and left or anything like that. So from an outsider's perspective, there was no systemic way to distinguish me. But my sister, I mentioned Holland, who has Down syndrome, was in a separate classroom. And I think something that really pervades the minds of developing minds, the minds of young people in high school, is that if you aren't given an opportunity to be exposed to and get to know differently abled individuals, it'll be your natural instinct to kind of clam up a little bit and just approach things very neutrally. And if nobody prompts you, teaches you, gives you the opportunity when you are in that position to grow, to be to receive them as they are, that's the seed that gets planted for you. You'll have this from your perspective, what would be perhaps an awkward interaction, and that'll color your opinion going forward. Everything will grow off of that. And for so many of my peers, the interactions that they had with the kids that were separated from everybody was this token inclusion that highlighted their disabilities, as opposed to in any way highlighting their similarities to everybody else. And so the kids are shown that the adults decided that these kids are different. Look at them. Pay attention to that. Highlight that they're different from you, and that's how you should think them. That's how you should think of them. That's how you should treat them. And if nobody challenges that, and if there's no systems in place to prevent that kind of thinking, those kids will ingrain that in their psyches, and they'll just carry that on into their lives. So I think making sure that there are policies in place, Tim, like you mentioned, having policymakers, having key decision makers in positions where they can make the kinds of policies that prevent those outcomes, policies that encourage exposure, understanding, are incredibly important.
I really appreciate you sharing that really personal connection you have to inclusion just within yourself, and reflecting on your sister's very different experience from yours. And thinking about how we all define inclusion as being a philosophy, and also tying in what Shameka and Tim were saying, that we have choices to make, right? Leaders have choices to make. And so in your experience that you just shared, the people in charge made a specific choice to segregate people based on their abilities. And that could be considered kind of like a cold, or just, a policy decision, a financial decision that someone makes. But then when you put it in the context of an actual family's experience of how that plays out in reality, that's what people need to focus on. This isn't just a decision like, well, if we put everybody here, it'll be easier for our staff, or financially it makes more sense for this. But the reality of that is revealing an underlying philosophy of segregation or sorting people.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Can I add something?
Please. I was going to say that's really powerful. So anybody who wants to respond to what Parker.
So a couple things pop into my head. One, there's the principal that I know in Washington, the state of Washington. Her name is Kathy Davis, and she is the principal of Ruby Bridges Elementary School, which is a fully inclusive school in the state of Washington. There's more inclusive schools in Washington, but that one in particular, and Kathy's a friend, and something she's said it multiple times, and it has always stuck with me, is that there are no neutral actions. I'm not sure where she got that, but it always reminds me of, I think it applies like everywhere, but especially in education, the choices that we make, right? It affects people. Like, there's real human lives that are affected by the choices that educational leaders make. And so, like you said, there was a choice that was made. We're going to have this separate program for, autistic learners, or we're going to have a separate program for students with intellectual disabilities. And the trajectories of those learners are forever affected because of those choices. And so what I hope people who are watching or listening can absorb and reflect on is that if you are in a leadership position to make those choices, like we need to be thinking about like inclusive practices and what the research has shown, what we know is best for kids, and everything points to equitable learning environments, where kids with and without disabilities learn together, and they have access to grade level curriculum and core instruction. So, and that's, any grade level you're talking about, kindergarten, pre-K all the way through 12th grade.
What stood out to me when you said that, that's a powerful statement. Like, I had to just, like, there's no neutral choice. Every choice we make personally every day is going to either affect our families, our jobs. So when you said it that way, Tim, it's like, you're right. As a leader over any program, any sector, anything that you do, you make choices that benefits those individuals that are under your leadership, as well as the programming that you're going. So if you look at it from that aspect, every decision that we make should be inclusive, no matter the disability, the racial background, the poverty level. Like, there are so many aspects of it. And I think because in some ways, because some disabilities or there are behaviors that show disabilities or concerns, it's easy to do the physical and say, oh, we're going to just do this because it's just to make everything okay, but not realizing you're still making a choice based off of one thing for this person and not looking at the overall whole picture, which is what we see in a lot of other areas and things that we do now. If we see somebody that's maybe African American, we assume this, or if we see someone that is this, we assume this. We have so many preconceived notions based off of what the systems have taught or you have learned, that we don't see the human individual in a whole way. And go back to what we taught for years, that what we always tell children 0 to 3, they learn in the environments. They learn how to talk, they learn how to walk. So why is it different when there is some kind of concerns, or not even concerns, honestly, when there is a difference? But we all are different. So that means we all should be in different places because we're different. So that's when he said, like, there's no neutral. Either we're all inclusive in everything or you're not inclusive. Like, I think that's the piece that we sometimes forget. We can't use a word and say, oh, I'm inclusive with everything over here, but not this one thing, right?
Right. Yeah.
No, inclusive is inclusive.
Yeah. It's like inclusion classrooms, right?
Exactly.
Don't
Yeah.
get started, Tim. We're not doing a hot
We're
topic.
not doing that one. No.
Oh no, sorry. So sorry. So sorry.
I do want to say,
yeah.
I do want to say that a lot of what we're talking about, if we peel back the layers specific to inclusion, is that we're all living in the fog of ableism. It's deep in our school systems, it's deep within ourselves. And so if that's something that when we're talking and you're listening to this, you're thinking, why am I making these choices? Why do I have this philosophy where inclusion works for certain kids, but not everybody? Our first episode that we did of inclusion from the start is about ableism. So I encourage you to go back and check that out. So Shameka, what do you think? What are some ideas you have about getting families involved in inclusion advocacy?
I think a big piece of the puzzle, kind of like what you almost said, the collective wisdom, that it starts with the 0 to 3. It starts with the early intervention programs. It's starting having those conversations, because the purpose of the 0 to 3 is to empower parents to be able to navigate and advocate and understand inclusion. But I think once families understand that just because my child has a disability, it's not, they're separated, but it's the fear. I'm afraid that because my child can't talk or my child can't do this, that they're not going to be able to be around others because we've had a hard journey. So it's really listening to them first, understanding where they are and what they're going through, and then helping them understand what inclusion is, because you don't honestly hear inclusion when you start off with the 0 to 3 programs, because someone's coming into my home, so I'm not anywhere, you're coming into where I am, the providers are coming in, we're working on these things, and then I go to a transition meeting and everything changes, right? So if we don't start when we're in the beautiful edifice of their home where they're comfortable with those conversations, introducing those things, talking about inclusion and what does it mean and what does it look like, and then helping them understand and seeing that their child is a champion and that they can learn. I think that's the piece, because even as a parent myself, and even though I've been doing this for a while, right? My whole background is early child education, special education. And so I have these conversations, but when I became a parent, I had that fear of can my child navigate and advocate for himself comfortably? And that as so you had the parent in me and the professional in me battling with each other to understand what that look like and what does that mean. So I had to uneducate what I went to school for, all these degrees and all this understanding, and I'm sitting in homes to provide families and walking them through these different conversations to realize it starts here, not when they walk into the door of a school, because they're not going to feel confident. So if I'm not confident and know what I'm talking about, I'm going to tell you, you're the expert in what you tell me to do. And then I follow that through the whole world because I'm not confident in to understand what inclusion is and what it looks like, because I didn't really hear about it until I got into another system. So systems need to partner together and start the process. And then, but then give the family the voice to advocate, listen to what they're saying they need, and create a system where they're leading us. And because as we so-called the knowledge and experience, we can give them the resources when it comes up and still let them do the work. Don't do it for them. Facilitate, coach them, but be there when they feel like they can't do it. And I think as a parent, that's what I've experienced. And that's why I've learned to say now to a family when we're talking about school, well, I don't think they can go into a classroom of 20. And I say, there's no limit. It's what we believe is what will happen. So if I believe that about my child, I'm saying my child can only succeed here. But we don't know. So let's take a chance and let's see. So I think that's the big piece, listening and really giving them the confidence. But we got to have the confidence, go back to what Tim said earlier. If the leadership and the person that's leading and guiding whatever organization is not showing that, the family can't receive it. Because then I come into an environment where it's toxic and I'm going to shut down and just do whatever you tell me. And then my voice dims and I just go with the system.
Absolutely. I'm trying to remember your words, Shameka. You basically said we can't limit the potential growth that a learner has in an environment. And I'm a former special education teacher. I spent 16 years in public schools, 13 in the classroom, and all in segregated environments, by the way. So like I was like in an autism classroom, right? And I remember having conversations about, okay, how are we going to go into from this separate class, how are we going to go into social studies or science, or I'm talking with the parents and developing a plan, and families would be like, no. Like, you are not taking my child who has been in this safe classroom for X amount of years and putting them in a social studies class. It will be a disaster. And so it's going, I hear your concerns, but why don't we try it? And I remember this family, this mom, and we'll call this young man Steve, because isn't his name. But I was teaching, it was a 3, 4, 5 classroom for students on the autism spectrum. And the parent absolutely refused to have the child be included in any general education classes, like apart from my classroom. But she would consider having Steve compete in the spelling bee. So we had a classroom spelling bee, and he won the spelling bee because he was amazing at spelling. And so then she's like, okay, this is great. What's going to happen when we have the whole school spelling bee? And so we had the whole school spelling bee, and I was there to provide support. We had visuals, we had, regulation support and everything like that. It got down to the last two. So it was this young lady and Steve, and when it was going back and forth. And so the last word was possibilities. Like, no joke. That was the last word. And he nailed it and won the spelling bee. And I remember like the whole school was just, yelling and cheering for this young man. And the family was so happy, right, that this had happened. And we ended up going to like a regional competition, and he did well. He didn't move on, but that was an example of taking a chance when the family, even though the family knew that this was a strength, it was still hard. Like, it still took some convincing for it to happen, but it happened.
What you just said reminds me of the story that Parker shared earlier, that not only did the other children in the program get the message that there must be a better place for their child, that family did. The system and the leadership of that district failed that family because they made them believe inaccurately that the best place for their child was a segregated, self-contained setting.
I think we're seeing in a lot of these stories that this a common thread of railroading. I think that, and back to what you initially said, Emily, I think that we constructed railroad tracks in a fog of ableism that no one wants to divert from. And you get put on it forcibly because there are experts, if you have a child with a disability, who come to you and tell you what needs to be done based on research that doesn't actually lead down the track. But the track is there, and it must be there for a reason. So we're going to go down it. And I can't help but think, and I actually wanted to ask you, Tim, about this. You mentioned your years as a special education teacher. I wonder, do people in higher decision making on the school side, do principals, do other people in positions like that, if they, coming from a perspective of administration, I assume that they've got a kind of a path of resource delegation and resource management in mind that they think is appropriate, that they think they need to stick to. And I wonder, I can't help but my instinct is to say that I think any discussion of increasing inclusion in their school system at some point connects to them to a matter of resources. There's already a railroad track. The railroad track is that there's these segregated classrooms. What you're asking me to do is spend however much time and money trying to bridge the divide. And I wonder, where do we need to start having conversations so that new minds coming into the field don't have those preconceived notions?
That's a great question. It is a lot about reimagining resources, because a lot of what happens in school districts is that we've just done it this way for so long that we can't imagine doing it any other way. And any suggestion of doing it another way is like, no, that will be too disruptive. That is why when we are working with the district, and also we work with districts who want to work with us, which is a big plus. Like, we get calls and emails and messages all the time. My family, I'm a parent. My child is being segregated in a disability specific program. Please come and work with my district. It's like, well, that's not exactly how it works. We would love to work with your district, but if there isn't anyone in leadership who is willing to evaluate and reflect on their practices, then we're not going to get very far. So we're really trying to convince and lean on, district administrators, so assistant superintendents, directors of teaching and learning, school principals, people that have um, the ability to make some sort of change in what is happening in their context. And so if we do have a conversation with someone who's like, hey, I know we should be more inclusive, right? And I think in general, the vast majority of educator, like district administrators, know they should be. They just don't know the how. They don't know how to get past, decades of segregated classrooms and programs. And if you've ever been in that position, it's so overwhelming to think about something different. So that's why whether it's MCIE or it's someone else or some other organization, we think a partner is essential in this work. So, but I think I'm hoping I'm answering your question, Parker. But the what I think needs to happen is school leaders maybe that are thinking, yeah, I think that we should be more inclusive. I know that there's a better path to really just start having those conversations and to really reflect on practices. I mean, we have actually, I don't know what Early Choices or the state of Illinois has, but ECTA has a inclusive practices framework that early childhood programs can look at. MCIE has a framework of inclusive practices for K-12. Just to start looking at those and going, like, really ask yourself, okay, are we really inclusive? Or maybe you're not, but you're like, what does an inclusive school district really look like? And then once you start going through those indicators and you're like, oh yeah, we don't really give time for collaboration with general and special education teachers. So maybe we can work on that. Or, maybe it's resource allocation. Like we have all of these special education teachers that are, have 4 or 5 students, so maybe we can reallocate, the resources of these teachers and the expertise of these teachers to serve more students and naturally distribute naturally have natural proportions across grade levels. There's lots of different things you can do, but yeah, I think that reflecting and having really honest conversations about where you want to be, and then go out and find people or resources to help you change.
Who do you think I guess this is a question for everybody, really, as all of you are in positions where you would be more knowledgeable about the infrastructure. Who do we need to have those conversations, to initiate those conversations with those policymakers?
Well, it kind of leads us back to the families, right? I think here in Illinois, we have the Understanding Inclusion modules, which we created for families. They explain the law, the research, the science behind inclusion, so families can be empowered at their child's meetings when they have their evaluations, when they have their IEP meetings. They can go in there saying, here's my hopes and dreams for my child, and here are my rights from IDEA, from the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. I know what my rights are. I think the change comes that way. I think families being empowered to advocate for their child, to really know what the law says, to know the research that what really does benefit children, can start making that ripple change. And I think once kids are included, it also sets the trajectory of kids to be included throughout their educational experience, just like the opposite of that has been shown in research, that when you're segregated, you tend to stay segregated.
And I agree. I also think a big piece of it is because we hear often that families are invited to be on, policy councils and this, that, and the other. But once they get there, they only agree to whatever the system is saying. So I really like one big thing is making sure that people understand what the law really says, right? And I feel like we're getting to the point, if the language is family friendly and we have those conversations that we're having with family members, you will see it. But also debunking the myths and the urban legends that you talked about. If we really sit down and talk about the emotions, going back to the mental mindset of what you're going through and what you're believing and what you're seeing, putting some support behind it, going back to what Tim stated, some classrooms, teachers feel like I'm not equipped. Because it's not only just the leadership, but when the leadership says it, if you got a whole building that don't feel like they can understand what all the changes that has happened behind autism and all the things that have happened, and they've been teaching for 20 years, they don't feel confident enough to do the inclusion. So I think it starts with the leader has to be confident and comfortable and supported. Then what you said, Tim, where then you bring someone in to help that leader, help those teachers. And then as a family member, if I see you feel confident enough and you're ready, I feel confident enough. I think that's the piece. So as a mom, I know when I drop my child off at this school, I have no fear because the principal's confident, the teacher's confident, the cafeteria, the hall, like the whole community is confident, to where even the superintendent knows our name because my son is so social. He talks to him all the time. So when we go to events, it's like we're welcome, we're acknowledged, and it's not because he has a disability, it's the community. So if we create that community in every school, every system, everyone feel like they got what they need and support, we're going to see inclusion because it's there.
I think for advocacy as well, I'll go on there's a slight tangent here. There's mentioning confidence, and I think I caught you at one point, you mentioned infrastructure in there. I think that maybe we need parents to be advocates. We need parents to be informed, to be able to go and initiate the conversations that need to be had at policy levels. And I can't help but feel like people are probably a little bit intimidated going into these spaces with professionals in education and administration who don't necessarily have a background in any of the things they're going to be dealing with. And if a kid at any age, if a family is not able to get a child to school, we have infrastructure for that. There is always, depending on your location, that we mandate that children are able to get to school. It is an equalizing force, no matter what your socioeconomic status, no matter what your circumstances are. The system reaches out to you. The system is always approachable, always usable. The system is always there to service you. My parents, along with several other individuals in my community, put together Holly's House of Hope, a nonprofit that works on building life skills, work skills for young adults with disabilities. And one of the biggest hurdles that they had to get over was parents of those young adults who weren't able to facilitate their transportation. And they fixed that by getting a bus, which, in a clear parallel there to schools, if infrastructure's there, I think both literally and psychologically, the barrier to entry to participate in the systems we already have are lowered. If it just takes a knowledgeable, courageous parent to spark conversations to get other people involved in school board meetings, in any forum where they would go and they would begin those kinds of conversations, it's hard to be the one to get the ball rolling, I think. I think that these conversations, like the one that we're having now, are often not everybody, of course, especially I'm the one of us with the least experience here. But I think it tends to be with knowledgeable people. I think it tends to be with people who are willing to enter the advocacy space. But there's plenty of parents who have been told what's going to happen to their children, that have been shown the existing infrastructure, and whether it's due to a lack of confidence, whether it's due to their literal ability to do so for any number of reasons, they might not be able to get that ball rolling. And I think an important thing for us to look at here across the board is making conversations more approachable. We have like you mentioned, Emily, the policy that we put out last year, that I haven't, of course, my proximity to my parents and to the advocacy sphere, I'm aware of it. But my wife is a teacher at the high school here. They haven't discussed that at all. There's been nothing's been said about that. That's not a concern of theirs, because nobody is in a position to bring it forward and to start that conversation. So I guess rounding all the way back from my trail off there, I think infrastructure, both literally and psychologically, is important for sparking any change that we want to make.
Yeah, I agree. I was thinking about that movie title, Everything Everywhere All at Once. I actually haven't seen that movie, but I love the title. That's kind of what I think needs to happen. I think teachers that are in higher education programs that are just entering into being a teacher, that system could support things better. The administrative level needs to change. I feel like at all levels, it kind of just has to be, there needs to be support for inclusion at every aspect of our educational system at the same time. And you're right, it is very hard to take on the role of being an advocate. Our system is set up that the school system is the expert. And so entering into that space feels very daunting. It's hard to be the first person to do something. And there's a whole host of issues that would cause someone not to want to advocate in a school. Fear of retaliation, just lack of self-confidence, lack of resources, not being able to get off work to be able to be at the meeting, not having language support, having a disability yourself, right? There's all these barriers that could prevent that from happening. So I appreciate what you're saying, because the onus should be on the system as well. We shouldn't have to work that hard for something that has already been established in the law as a right for each child. So I appreciate that.
I think it all comes back down to, and just from the conversation we had today, is being open to have difficult conversations. And I wouldn't even say difficult, being open to be vulnerable to discuss, but also be confident enough to support and just make sure that our actions and our mindsets and the things that we do show inclusion at all times. I think if we could be, I've always, my mom and them always told us that you're a walking billboard. No matter where you go, no matter what you do, someone is watching you. And in the world that we're living in now, if a post we share, a hello we say to someone, a story, telling our stories that like we're doing now, if it helps to spread inclusion one way, one seed can be watered by so many people to bring about a change. So I feel like that's the key is that if we continue to do the work in every room we walk into, every conversation that we have, personal, professional, we're always talking to someone about inclusion. If we keep showing the aspects, we can help make a difference. We might not see it now, but neither did Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, any of those that went before us to pave a way. They didn't see what we see now. So if we continue the work that we do now, that one day we'll see it'll come to pass for our children, our grandchildren, when our children have children, our great-grandchildren. But if we just keep doing the work and don't quit, I believe it will see a difference.
I would like to just leave everyone with a thought about what you can do in your own local context to move inclusive education forward. So I think a lot of times we feel powerless and hopeless because we can't make the big changes that we want. I know that's how I felt when I was in the school system. But what I'm reminded is that you can still make change in your own circle of influence, and you can still start to have conversations with the people that are closest to you. And you may not convince everyone, but the likelihood that you will affect someone with your thinking, inclusive practices, that's just the best way to get things started. So I would encourage everyone to just have open and honest conversations with the people around you, and just ask questions. Ask questions and try to get the conversation started.
I think we're seeing, rounding all the way back to looking at it philosophically. I think we're saying, Shameka, like you said, and I think we're kind of seeing here making it ubiquitous, making it a part of ourselves, and allowing that to be the spark that can get the fire going. I think we're seeing that making this a human issue, making that, which it is, of course, but making it an issue not of something that gets talked about as a docket list item somewhere that everybody's ready to move on from and go home after the meeting is over, but making everybody aware what the stakes are, making everybody aware the tools that they have at their disposal, making people see how right it is to be inclusive and how easy it can be when we all realize that we are all on the same team. I think, Tim, like you said, I don't think that there's anybody sitting in a policy-making decision who thinks that we're too inclusive or rather doesn't want to be more inclusive. I think that you could get anybody to agree with you on that. I think the issue is we're facing a mountain and we don't realize that we're all taller than that together. And if we show people, if we express an inclusive philosophy, an inclusive mindset, and we get other people into that same mindset, then we can all get stuff done. We can all work together.
I absolutely love that, Parker. We're standing in front of a mountain, but we're all taller than that together. That's really powerful. I just want to say thank you for all of you for participating in our conversation tonight. And one thing I'd like to say in closing is, you know how once you get a yellow car, everywhere you look, you see a yellow car, or if you're thinking about, if you get into something, all of a sudden it's everywhere. I just encourage people to change their algorithm and their thinking in that sense. If you start looking for opportunities for inclusion, you will find them. And if you start looking for resources to support you in changing your mindset, learning a new practice, finding a thought partner, maybe no one in your community is inclusive minded, but you want to talk to somebody. We have at our fingertips a lot of ways to connect and kind of change our way of thinking, changing what resources we have, and changing our algorithm to tune into being more inclusive. So I thank all of you for being here. I appreciate everyone who's listening and or watching, and look into the description for links to resources that we mentioned today. Thank you.